Okay, so welcome everyone. This is the Houston.NET users group of the greater Houston area. And today we're going to be having a presentation on end-to-end testing with Cypress.io by Ahmed Hammad. This is meeting 211. I don't know if 211 is a fortuitous number to anybody, but it's a nice number. As we started virtual, we're in partnership with the North Houston.NET users group, and welcome to everyone from the greater Houston area and beyond. Since it's all remote, it's a lot easier for other people to dial in from other places and get to see what we're talking about, and we get to see what other people are talking about. So it's been good. So what we're going to do is talk meeting agenda a little bit. We're going to talk first about the meeting agenda, announcements and infos. We do have a JetBrains license to give away for whoever's present at the time, and we'll have the discussion by Ahmed to start right afterwards. Housekeeping, again, wireless, you're already there. Congratulations, you've connected to the wireless or the wired. The restrooms are somewhere behind you, and there are free snacks in the break room in case you're interested and want to get a snack, a beer. Feel free, just whatever, just treat it as your own place. Our place is your place. Houston Tech Fest is imminently coming, September 12th, 2020, and call for speakers closes extremely soon as well. So if you're interested, you can look for Houston Tech Fest on Twitter, on Facebook, LinkedIn, and the link is there for the form to fill in. Is Michael on? You want to say a few words about it? He was on. Oh, Michael's having issues trying to connect. So,
I will say Houston Tech Fest 2020 is not going to be at the Microsoft office. It is going to be virtual via Teams. So more of the virtual meetings.
All right. Yeah, let's fix that while we're here.
But yes, the call for speakers closes in 2 days. So get your speaker information into Mr. Steinberg. I will see if I can dig up the link and post that in chat.
Okay.
Because I know he sent it to me, so I just need to find it.
Somewhere. Yeah. So it'll be exciting.
Pile of email.
Yay. Yeah, Houston Tech Fest will be great. A lot of speakers, a lot of great technical topics. Been going on for quite some time now, and it's always a great time. It'll be interesting to see how we do virtual, and it's just to kind of keep the momentum going, keep everyone talking and learning, and it's going to be a good time for everybody. So in light of that, we're most likely not going to have a Houston.NET user group meeting next month because hopefully everyone's going to be completely blown out of whatever by Tech Fest, and is going to be completely just drained of all life by being full of information in a good way. Let's just say that. All right. So we, as of a few months ago, we're part of the .NET Foundation series of user groups. What this means is that we're listed on their site, and our events get posted along with a bunch of other ones. And in theory, they will eventually send us some swag that we can then give away. And hopefully not in person, because that's not going to happen. And also, we may be trying out different ways to connect to the meetings in the upcoming months that they're also helping out with. So now that their elections are over, they're relaxing now and able to actually help out with a lot more things. So it's going to be exciting to see where that goes. So we can connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Meetup, Twitter, and on YouTube. We'll post a link, as always, on the Meetup page. So if you signed up to accept the Meetup, if you said you're coming to the Meetup, then when I put a comment on the YouTube link, you should get a notification either through the app or by email. It's probably best through the app. We'll see. But we'll post the video links everywhere as well to let people know that it's there. So in case you miss it, or if you have to duck out, then we'll be good to go. Partnership, again, North Houston.NET users group, nhtnug.org, Twitter, GitHub, Facebook, also available to reach out to them as well and have a conversation. North Houston News Group has a sponsor, iSphere, and pop up in that website. Houston-based IT consulting and IT staffing firm with a proven track record in both the private and public sectors. iSphere offers extensive knowledge and demonstrated expertise from IT consulting on strategy, collaboration, and information management to IT staffing to get IT done right. They have some job openings as well. So you can take a look, see what they got. That does not look like a software engineering role. So maybe not that one, but we'll have to see. Let's go back to slides. Improving, catapult, all these, there's a few job postings for all these sites, and always take a look and see what's available and see what's out there. That way, this way. There it is, links worked. Okay, prize drawing. So now that everyone's here, we will do the picking one person at random. Let's see, based on our participant list, we have 14 participants. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And then we will consult the book of armaments to pick a random number. No, 14. There we go. Number 3, Assad, you are the lucky winner. And I will reach out to you with the JetBrains license information. Yay!
Yay, thank you.
That's better. Good. All right. And I'll reach out to you afterwards when Ahmed starts. I'll get in touch with you and give you the information. So make sure that you go. So each month, JetBrains does give us a license to give away. And it is for like all their goodies. They recently did change their product mix, the names of it. So you may have to kind of take a look at exactly what it is that you want to get. But you'll make sure you get it for a year. So that is excellent stuff. I enjoy it and I support it. All right. Tonight's talk will be end-to-end testing with Cypress.io by Ahmed Hammad. And I will pass it over to Ahmed to get it started. Pass the presenter rights. There it is. Yes.
Hey.
It's coming. It's coming to get you. All right. You have the ball.
Excellent. So can everyone hear me? Thumbs up. We're good. Okay. Excellent. Okay. So my name is Ahmed Hammad or Ahmed Hammad. If you can pronounce it, Gerald did a great job pronouncing it. So hey, but however you can pronounce it, fine with me. And so I'm here to talk about Cypress.io, and I am an improver. So if you're familiar with audio, work at the same organization. And so anyone want to maybe kind of weigh if you heard of Cypress.io at all? Maybe? Okay. So you're okay, good. This is gonna be kind of new. So that's good. So get introduced to some new folks. So give you an idea of the structure of the talk. This is going to be introduction to Cypress.io. So I'm going to, kind of tell you a little bit about it, kind of talk a little bit about just automated testing in general, just to, you haven't done much of that, get you kind of acclimated, then segue into Cypress.io and end-to-end testing. And we'll use some code examples, and we'll actually do things live. So we'll install live, go through some code examples and so on. And if you have any questions, definitely don't hesitate to ask. Okay. So, and just to give you a sense kind of about me, so you know at least where I'm kind of coming from with this, I am a software developer. I'm not QA, but I do work closely with QA. So, and automated testing from unit to end, especially unit, is a big part of what I do. So I've used Cypress.io mainly as my own tool on the side. On occasion, sharing it with our QA person. So just giving an idea of at least the kind of niche I'm working at, but it is, of course, meant for use for anyone who can benefit from this tool. Okay. So and I kind of have a little bit of notes to the side. So you see me looking to the side. I'm kind of glancing a little bit. So let's start off. So Cypress.io is a tool for automated end-to-end testing. So the first thing is just to kind of get a quick overview, maybe refresher on automated testing. So how many folks here write automated tests as part of what they're doing, or okay, got a few. Okay. So the main idea behind automated test, of course, is that, and let's go ahead and might as well share my screen. So the main thing behind automated test is that, okay, and can everyone see my screen? Okay, got it. Okay. So the main idea behind automated test, of course, is that we try to write tests that we don't have to run manually. And the main structure of that is that the test will generally run through some process, call some functions with like known values, and we then, make assertions or expectations on the results. And, since this is a .NET group, you may have used something like NUnit or MS Test for your automated tests. And so I just kind of open up a quick page just to show you a quick example of an automated test in NUnit. And again, it's just to get you kind of oriented when we kind of branch off into Cypress. So, here's an example of an automated test, right? It just basically checks to see if something's prime. We've got a little, setup, which essentially initializes the context for the test, and they have tags here. And then we go ahead and have like one of the actual tests itself. And it just makes a call with a specific value whose results we know, right? What it should be. And then we run an assertion. And this could be called an assert, expect, should, depending on a framework. And and so in this case, if the results are not what we expect, the test fails, we know there's an issue. And that's roughly the structure of automated tests. And Cypress IO pretty much follows that structure, although you do write in JavaScript. But the elements do map on to like the test here. So if you've done like NUnit test or any kind of unit testing, the structure should be fairly familiar to you. Okay. So, and again, this is just a quick and dirty, hey, let's make sure we kind of know what automated tests are before moving. But any questions? And again, feel free to ask at any time. Okay, awesome. And that's generally just what we're doing. So Cypress IO will do this, but it'll do this for end to end, right? Not unit. So this kind of test that we're looking at here is a unit test. Okay, it's testing. In this case, it's testing a specific method, right? Here, basically, the isPrime method of the prime service. Did I see a question? Are we good? Or okay, sorry. I'll let me know if it's a question.
But yeah, I'll let you know. I was just saying if anyone wants to ask a question in chat instead, okay, then I can be the jerk that interrupts instead.
Okay.
I don't mind.
Okay, perfect. So, right. So in the case of a unit test, we'll write, we'll test like one particular relatively small unit of functionality, like in this case, a method call, and confirm the results of what we expect. And that's mainly the kinds of tests that as developers, we're very used to writing, okay, especially through workplace that has a, significant testing culture. And that's the kind of test that's assumed behind things like TDD, right? Test-driven development or test-driven design or some, like to call it, emphasize the design part. So Cypress IO, it's a framework for end-to-end tests, not unit tests, okay? You could use it for unit tests, but you're kind of sort of, really kind of taking a hammer, to a very small problem. So an end-to-end test is a test that, again, it's an automated test, but it runs your application, instead of making calls to like methods directly, it actually steers your web page, the page for your application, okay? And so instead of like, saying, oh, hey, call this function, it's going to be more like, oh, click this button, right? Enter a value in this text box. Hey, did this value show up in this div? Okay. And so with this, the type, you kind of get into some different dynamics. Okay. So with an end-to-end test, you run into, a lot of like need for asynchronous handling, because in a lot of cases, you'll send a command to click on something, it comes back immediately, but the corresponding API call could still be processing. So there's some extra dynamics you have to take into account that you wouldn't have to take into account for, say, a unit test. And even how you're interacting with the elements, right? Now you need to be able to refer to that button on the page. Well, how are you going to locate that button uniquely, right? It isn't like it has a nice little method name for you. Although, depending on how your page is structured, this may not be much of a problem. But these extra dynamics come into the play. Plus, they tend to test much thicker or deeper swaths of functionality, which is why they're called end-to-end tests. Because when you go to a page and assuming it makes API calls and it has, of course, its backend and all that good stuff, the moment you do something like, say, enter some values, click a button, you're exercising your front end logic, right? You're making API calls. Whatever processing is happening at the back end, that's getting exercised, right? It's coming back. So you're exercising a lot of functionality with a relatively small like testing, footprint. And so you're kind of going from end to end, right? Your front end all the way to your back end, and really back again. And hence, it's why we refer to them as end-to-end tests. Now, and this again will bring up some interesting dynamics. One, they're not going to be they won't be as fine-grained as unit tests. Okay, you're not really going to kind of use them and be able to know, oh, this method failed because this guy came back with the wrong result. You might have some insight depending on how familiar you are with the page, but there's going to be sort of, that greater kind of level of uncertainty because you're exercising so much code. In addition, because they're steering your application, they tend to trace more directly onto like acceptance tests, right? So, or acceptance criteria. So you could actually have an end-to-end test that, has a very good one-to-one mapping with, say, your acceptance criteria on a user story. And it's the kind of test that, say, a QA person who may not be terribly technical, QA people, the level of technical expertise varies, would be able to look at, understand, even a stakeholder, non-technical stakeholder, would be able to see the test run and understand, because again, it's all at the user level. So in this regard, the end-to-end tests don't replace or compete with your unit tests. They complement them, okay? And there's another sort of, another element to add basically to your testing, repertoire and your test coverage, okay?
Quick question. So
sure.
is this like Selenium for people that have used that before?
Very good question. In fact, I was about to get to that. Excellent. So yeah, so Cypress.io, so the closest comparison to Cypress.io would be something like Selenium. Now, Selenium is a web automation framework. It becomes a testing tool, of course, when you couple it with some kind of testing framework. So you can use Selenium, you can use Selenium bindings with, say, end unit tests, or with, say, jest test and so on. And at that point in time, it becomes a testing framework. And so, yes, it's the thing that Cypress.io is most often compared to is Selenium, but Cypress.io is like an entire test framework out of the box. So it has its web, its web automation. It's got its testing framework. It's got a lot of useful utilities all in there. Whereas Selenium is just a web automation tool that you could use for testing, but you could also use, say, for web scraping. But yes, but Cypress.io is most often compared to Selenium. And in my experience using both, I found Cypress to be much easier to use, and also a lot faster than Selenium. So, but that's generally the points where to compare it. Other things, again, you can compare it with would be some of the other, again, web automation tools. You've got like, Puppeteer, right? You've got Playwright, which is kind of like Microsoft's kind of, angle on Puppeteer. You got Test Cafe, which is a full testing framework, which would probably be the most direct comparison to Cypress.io. But yes, that would be the closest you would actually match it up to. Excellent. Yeah, good question. Okay. So again, I'm just kind of confirming. So, okay. So yeah, so let's go ahead and we'll start by installing Cypress.io. So I just popped open my command prompt. Okay. So first we'll just create a folder. I'm just going to call it Cypress. Okay. But whatever you want. And it's pretty much, what you would expect, right? npm installed Cypress, okay? And so we'll kind of let it do its thing, okay? So again, this will install Cypress. And again, the installation will include, the Cypress test runners, right? It's got a few built in. It'll include, like the mocking libraries, the stubbing libraries. I think it includes, Lodash, I believe, or underscore, one of those. Basically, all of kind of the useful stuff that they figure, you probably need in the testing. So pretty much most of the stuff you're going to need is probably going to be in there already. So they did a pretty good job of anticipating the kinds of needs that you would need. Now, how's the lighting and everything? Is everything okay? We're kind of getting a little bit darker. Are we good with lighting? Do we need to turn on some more light?
You're looking better and better as it gets darker.
Sadly, it's not the first time I was told that. Okay. So.
If you ask the question, you're going to get the answer. So you're welcome.
We're going to have to ask any more questions. Okay. here it's going ahead and kind of grinding away. Now the other thing also is that Cypress IO is a relatively new tool. Okay. So I mean, it's been around for at least a few years, but it doesn't really have the longevity of, again, Selenium. So of course, there's going to be, some, maybe some questions about, okay, how much information's out there on it and so on. So their website is quite comprehensive, and as time goes on, more and more people are paying attention to it and kind of asking questions. But of course, that is something to keep in mind. So while you could probably jump on Stack Overflow, and find, 50,000 answers to a given Selenium question, with Cypress IO, it might be kind of a little bit more work. Okay. So while this is going on, I do want to talk a little bit about like some of the stuff that Cypress does actually have over Selenium. And we'll see this when we run through like some of the examples in the test runner. Okay. So again, I don't know how many folks have like used Selenium, but so one of the things with Cypress IO tries to do is it tries to make end-to-end testing easy. So their whole idea is they want to get you from like zero to testing, ASAP, right? Without you like doing a whole lot of stuff to worry about. So for example, they have a lot of like nice little things. One of the things that they'll do is that a lot of their commands that access objects have built-in waits and assertions. So whereas if you're using something like Selenium, where, if you try to like say access something's not available, comes back to an error, your test has failed, and you have to like write some extra code to do that. The Cypress IO commands will automatically like check to see if it exists and continue to check until basically the time limit has expired. And so what this means is, one, you don't have to code that yourself, but two, it also actually takes this asynchronous behavior that you get from end-to-end tests and actually makes it seem more synchronous. Because a lot of your tests now can be written in such a way that they seem to be synchronous, even though in reality, this command, would come back immediately, but something's not quite available, so it's still kind of polling for it, and then it jumps to the next one. So it gives you a nice illusion of synchronous behavior. Now, another thing Cypress IO does, that's really nice, is it has a very nice test runner. And its test runner is basically a browser with like an extra panel that actually shows your test as they're running. And this test runner includes some nifty features. One of the best ones is the element locator, right? So Cypress IO can let you actually like click on the element locator, click on the element, and it will give you the selector you need to access that element. And I'll show you that in action. We'll delve into some of the examples and I'll show you that in action. But this is useful too, because if you've used other systems and you're thinking, man, they never added in an ID or a data test ID for this button. How do I get to it? And then you may kind of have to like, well, okay, let me try to figure out the path, or hey, let me open up Firefox and try to spit out the X path or whatever. Cypress pretty much kind of shortcuts that whole process. So it makes it very easy to crank that stuff out. Now, the thing with Cypress, though, is that there are some cons. Okay. Now, the main one, again, is Cypress is a whole framework. And so you kind of buy into the whole package, and a few implications come from this. So the first, for example, is you're writing your tests in JavaScript, right? It's a whole framework. It's essentially based on like Jasmine Jest sort of test framework. And so that's how you're writing your test. Whereas when you're looking at something like, say, Selenium, you're pretty much like, oh, hey, all I need is just basically a WebDriver. I could use whatever test framework I want. And so you could be writing your Selenium test, often, C# or often JavaScript or Python, So whereas with Cypress, that's not quite the case. Okay. And that's kind of a big deal. And the other thing also is, since pretty much everything's sort of, bundled in, again, you can't really quite mix and match to kind of build your own customized testing solution. So it's almost like some folks like to go out and just buy a computer off the shelf, at Fry's or Micro Center or, Walmart, right? Others might want to actually, buy the components and ensure that the computer is just so. Right? The former is easier, gets you out the door faster, but will not yield something that's very customized. The other, right, vice versa. And that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind. Also with tests, and Cypress IO is faster than Selenium, but end-to-end tests do tend to be slower in general. So that's something else to keep in mind. So where you're cranking through a bunch of unit tests, for example, in no time, I mean, the end-to-end test will take longer. They won't be like excruciating or anything, but they will take some time longer.
So I have to ask the question.
Sure.
Is Cypress installation faster than Selenium?
So in this case, no. Now, no. I mean,
maybe you've got the one out of the oven that's already ready to go that you want to show us instead.
Yeah, no, this one. I actually made the mistake because I actually like ran through, kind of did a dry run on this on a different system. And that was a system with, a solid state hard drive. So it was done in about a quarter of the time. And I'm just like, man, okay, I got to keep talking, right? So yeah, so I actually expected this to run faster, but that's actually not really a problem because I was also going to go ahead and take you also just to Cypress website because, and actually you can see some of my Google history on Cypress and Razor, right? Because we had a little talk and I was like, I always used SPAs. And I don't know if you're familiar, but we had a little bit of, do you mind if we kind of talk a little bit about our chat about Cypress and SPAs, Garo, or okay?
Yeah, I mean, I know when you first talked to me about the topic that we asked, okay, so SPAs, the single page applications tend to be what people are doing for a lot of big ones. And Cypress would probably inject itself into that to use it, but in theory, it should inject any web page, right? Like if you have a server-side generated code or multiple HTML files, it should be able to just kind of put it into a frame or canvas or something and just automate that, I assume.
So, I mean, and that may be the case. So when I had used, so every time I'd use Cypress and pretty much most of what I'm doing, they're all SPAs. So I never really kind of got the opportunity to, to like run into whether or not Cypress actually, is, can work with like, say, multiple, an application that changes pages on you. I do know that, and this, again, maybe they've gotten better about this, but this was definitely a pain point up until very recently, might still be the case. When you had a page that, say, would change domains, that I knew that Cypress tests would fail on that. Now, if that was only changing of domains or any kind of page change, that I didn't know just because I really, again, pretty much like live in spa land, and the only time really the only time really I would actually, get out of there was with something like, say, external authentication. Domain change, boom, test fails. And they got some workarounds for that, but that's the one case where if you deal with external authentication, you might have a bit of a painful time, and you may want to check Cypress sites. And again, it's very useful, a lot of good information, but that is the one, like kind of the one pain point that I found is if you need to do that, you could have a bit of a rough time of it. And I think I cobbled some kind of solution that was really, it kind of sort of worked, and but still. But yeah, but over on their site, pretty much they got all the info, and Cypress is free. The only time they really have the pricing is if you want to like use. They kind of have their own sort of kind of test labs and so on. So you could pay for that, but if you're just looking to use just basically just Cypress, on your own and so on, or even an organization, you're fine. It's when you get into want to get the extra goodies that they'll charge you, but otherwise it's free. And I don't know if it's like MIT license or what, but anyway, so. Okay, let us check okay, so here we are. We're done. Okay. Yeah, okay. Filibustering over. No. But so
fastest web framework ever.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna take you to the page anyway. I'm like, we'll just shift that over to now. So we have Cypress installed. So now let's go ahead and open it. So and again, so I'm gonna do first the GUI version. Okay. So I'm doing npx Cypress open, which opens up the GUI version of Cypress. Now take a look what happened. It says, oh, hey, looks like this is your first time using Cypress. So one of the things Cypress also does is it scaffolds for you. So it'll create a default configuration file. It'll create your folder structure. It'll plunk in, all of the necessary goodies. And most important for this talk and for your learning experience, it puts in a bunch of examples. Okay. And in fact, we're going to be going through these examples. So if you're interested in playing with Cypress, there's nothing, no code that you need to download, because everything I'm doing is going to be through their examples, which are illustrative on the various capabilities. So it'll go through all that stuff. Now, Cypress, now in terms of running, Cypress is okay in terms of like run speed. It does take a little time to open, but it actually still runs a lot faster than I've had Selenium run for me. But again, end-to-end testing, there's going to be a bit of that sort of, initial sort of, speed hit while it opens. And again, that's something just to keep in mind if you're coming from, again, unit testing, right? Where you're used to your tests running generally very fast. Okay, so here, let's open it up. So down here, there's the icon for Cypress. It'll load in a moment. Okay. And pretty much the first time you run it, it is going to run a little slower. But every time you run it, it is going to take a little bit of time to start up. Once it's running, it's okay in terms of speed. But like every time you run it, it will take a little time to start up. Unless, again, you got a nice solid state hard drive and you don't have to worry about that. So do we have any questions or anything so far? We're waiting for Cypress to open.
The question I would always ask with the testing solution is, does it run headless, or do you have to run it like with a logged in system looking at a browser?
Cypress does run headless. And in fact, I'm going to also show you a headless run after we kind of take a tour of the GUI. So it runs headless, and it also supports the ability to take screenshots and even video captures of some of the tests that you're running in headless mode. So that, because sometimes the nice thing about, headless is good for speeds. Although I've noticed that Cypress headless, while I think faster, is not terribly faster than, say, its GUI mode. But the nice thing about the GUI is, of course, you could sometimes catch other visual issues while a test is playing. This one at least kind of gives you a little bit of like the best of both worlds, right? You can add a little extra runtime if you're firing up like Cypress and you're kind of taking like video captures and so on. But there's also something where you can come back, look at the video captures and see, like, say, where a test failed or a screen capture, and be like, oh, hey, this happened, that happened, so on. Let's minimize all this. So this first run is taking a little longer. And I'm actually wondering because I'm not actually running in a DOS shell, I've actually got a git posh, and I'm wondering if that's adding some overhead. We'll give it a few more seconds, then I might just run it in a DOS shell and see. In fact, I've run it from git posh before without an issue. But let's slide this over here and let's confirm. Again, sorry, like I said, when I ran through the dry run on this, I was running on another system with a solid state drive. So this was all fast. And I kind of forgot how much extra time it takes. So, but you can add that also to the list of certain things with Cypress, right? Is that, speed, while faster than Selenium, it's still like any end-to-end testing framework. It's still an issue. Okay. So while this is firing, okay, so while this is warming up, and I might just kill this process and fire it up again if it's not going to load, because normally it does not take this long. So I'm thinking something happened here. So,
virus scan didn't like what you did.
Who knows? But yeah, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to assume. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, hold on a sec. I think we are actually. Okay, I think we might be good. Okay, I thought we hadn't opened here. Okay. So hold on a sec. I think I've got a window. Okay, so I'm going to nix this guy. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and just going to go through the old-fashioned. Right. Okay. So we're going to get this guy. So remember what you said, Gero, about how Cypress demos well?
The videos on the website seem okay. The marketing materials are very nice.
Yeah, that's something. Yeah, something went a little sideways with this open. So I'm just. Yeah, so I'm going to give this a second or two, and then. I guess now's a good time. Any questions?
Yeah. I was definitely asking about, so headless is something I usually ask because of running with automation, like on Azure DevOps or like if I want to run end-to-end testing. because I've used to do automation for UI testing, things like that, and you had to have a machine logged in but not locked, so that it could actually interact with the interactive mode. And I was wondering if that's something that's required with this, or if it runs headless. Then, for example, Azure DevOps, the hosted agents from Microsoft have Chrome. They've got Chrome drivers, so you can actually run some of the end-to-end stuff behind the scenes with Chrome headless. So if it's able to fire all that up, that's extremely useful to be able to do end-to-end testing when it does eventually when it does kick off. So you can do end-to-end testing and run your tests automated on Azure DevOps, and then just post the results. So you don't have to like have a logged-in system ready to go and looking at something.
Yeah, with something. So with Cypress, so I haven't set it up like that, but they do have some documentation, and I believe in the case of Cypress, so what they want you to do, I believe, is to basically create a Docker and like run it in there. Just because the way Cypress is, you can't. It isn't quite as friendly in like say CI pipelines as say Selenium. But yeah, if you are willing to configure like a Docker and kind of give it its own kind of space, then you should be able to do that. My one concern about it, and again, I'm not sure how well it plays with others. So like for example, a lot of the other testing tools, as long as it is in fact like writing out to standard error and all that stuff, if something goes sideways, you should be okay. Like for example, if you take something like say Jest test, right? Whether they're running end to end or whether they're running unit tests. And you've got it like inside a build pipeline. Could be K, could be just a PowerShell script, right? And you're pretty much kind of checking the output, seeing if anything fires off to standard error. Then you kind of know, oh hey, this failed. Let's fail the whole CI. Since I haven't tried it with Cypress, I don't know. As long as they're maintaining and following those conventions of writing the standard error with a headless mode, which I would hope they would, right? I mean, especially if they're suggesting you set up Dockers, then we should be okay. So, okay, so, okay, so this is a little bit, okay, I'm gonna tell you what, I'm gonna leave this, because I think I may have actually a backup here. So maybe might be time to, let's see, open the backup. Because I'm wondering if maybe this installation went south. So let's see. Okay, so here we go. Time for plan B. If you give me one moment, I'm just restoring a previous backup. Good. All this stuff. Okay. So let's see how this one. Okay. So yeah, so I just pulled open I had an old backup of Cypress. It might be an older version. So I just kind of pulled it out of my backups and I threw it in here. So let's see if this one opens up. But yeah, this is actually, yeah, there's definitely something on. I think the installation may have just failed quietly, but that installation definitely was bad. So I'm giving this one a second. It looks like it's updating it. So hopefully this guy will work. Otherwise, we're going to have one of the most awkward Cypress presentations I've ever had. And it is, yeah, maybe it is a process with the screen share. One of the things is that I've never actually tried doing it with like at least WebEx. I've done it. Okay, here we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, so apparently that installation was just bad. So, okay, so everyone, okay, yay. So, well, yeah, so much for showing you the seamless Cypress installation process. Okay, so over here, So you could see basically what happened is it opened it up. It opened up basically its like test browser, right? And it created a whole bunch of examples. Okay, so a bunch of examples that we could basically dig into and view. And then over here you could see, okay, so it's got support for Chrome, Firefox, and Electron. Now there's supposed to be support for Edge. I had read that. I don't know if that's still kind of a thing or still some time away or what, but at least you've got support for these browsers. So that's the other thing also with end-to-end testing is that some of the ones have like more cross-browser support, even going into various like, mobile mode and so on. And so if you want to do cross-browser testing, that's something to just kind of keep in mind. Okay. So we're going to go ahead. So we're going to go ahead and run these tests. Okay. So you got all these guys here. I went ahead and, let me get this kind of out of the way. So yeah, I'm like, fine. Chrome's fine. Yeah. So I'm going to say run all specs. Okay. And a little bit about the wording here. Cypress likes to call its test specs because it kind of takes a sort of BDD, like behavior driven development view of things. So for it to test kind of outline system functionality, but you don't have to name it that. If you have anything with a .js, it's going to pick it up as a test. Just a little FYI. Okay. So I clicked on that and here we go. Okay. So everyone can see, okay. Okay, so the tests are loading. And so it's going to run through all of the tests, all of its example tests in its test suites. Okay. So, okay. And so over here, basically, each one of these basically demonstrates like a particular bit of Cypress functionality. But of course, in your case, you would have, whatever kind of features you're trying to test. So you can see here, off to the left, it's kind of telling you which test suite is running, where it is there. And then over here in this main area, you could see like, what it's actually running through on the test. And so you can kind of see the test playing out. And every time a test passes, you can see the green check mark. If any of them fail, you'll see a red X with more detail on where the test failed. And then here it gives you just a count of the number of tests that passed, the number of tests that failed, currently 0, the number of tests that were skipped. Skipped is something we do, and I'll show you that in a bit. The total test runtime. We can keep it from scrolling if we don't want it to scroll this area. We can stop the tests. And this is the element explorer, which I'll show you shortly. Okay. And you can see here the way to test our groups. You got like a little header, and then you have the test. And you can have like test nested to like any degree you want. So I could have like here, assertions, implicit assertions, explicit. You can actually keep nesting them. So when you have like a test suite within a test suite or a particular related test, you can do that nesting, and that's pretty nice. And I'll also show you this in headless in a bit. That's over you can see. And just by looking at some of the tests playing out, you also get a sense of like the different features it supports, right? You've got cookies, you've got, the commands, and so on. Okay. Okay. And this won't take too much longer to run, but you can see, like, for example, it's running through. We're pushing on the 2-minute mark. I mean, not bad by end-to-end standards, but again, if you're used to running unit tests, you might be used to, your test being done about a minute and a half ago, right? So that is something, again, to keep in mind because, again, since the tests are playing out, it's rendering the DOM and so on, it's going to take longer. Even in headless mode, it's going to take some time. Okay. So you see here, that last test, I kind of zoomed in, right? So, and now it does have commands where it can go back and forth in the browser history, but I don't know if that translates into supporting multiple pages. Gives me a little bit of hope, but kind of back to that Razor question. If you look inside the test examples, you'll see it actually kind of navigating back and forth through the browser history. But again, I don't know if it's something that's kind of manipulating just for the query strings or what. So, okay.
So what does the script look like?
Oh, we're gonna go into those. Oh yeah, we'll go into those because we're gonna go into the script, and I'll also show you like the structure of how those tests are written because they're kind of different. They're kind of more in a jest, like Jasmine jest style, and in JavaScript. So the structure will be very different from say NUnit or MS Test, but the elements map onto in a pretty intuitive way. So I'm going to show you that. We're going to dig into the code with the examples. Oh yes, we'll get into that, and in the process, also show you like the specific ways items are written and some kind of best practices, gotchas, and so on. Yeah, once this is done, I'll do a headless run just so you can kind of see what headless looks like. and then we'll jump in and we'll kind of start like digging into some of these tests and going through them and talking about practices and so on. And if you just noticed, we had go ahead.
I say we can go to the test first, and then we can talk about headless afterwards. So I was wanted to ask about it, but okay, I think more interesting for people to see like what does the test look like and the Element Explorer and those things like what's useful in testing for us.
Okay, sure, got it. So the Element Explorer, is right here, and this is actually something that you use from here. So you click on it, okay, and then you go to like say the item you want, and then you click on it. And then it basically gives you the selector, and then you can actually copy it, and then you can paste it in your test. And that's really the to the Element Explorer. So if there's a particular item you want, just get it that way. And then you paste it in your test and go about your business. Now for the code. Okay, so go over here. And let's see, we cannot need any of this stuff here. And actually, I want to open up the Cypress. So I'm opening up my Cypress folder. Let's see, I'm in Cypress 2. We're going to go ahead and say, okay, so here we go. And I'm going to go ahead and make this bigger. So, and let me open up one of the files just so we have some little more context on. That's not all. This is Cypress 2. So I do want pictures and examples and integration. And oh, there we go. Go ahead and do. Yeah. Okay. Version. Okay. And so I'm going to make this. So let's see. Is this good size-wise? Okay. And this guy, I'm going to kind of keep it kind of open just so we can kind of look at some of the different kind of tests. But so yeah, so let's look at the test code. So first thing we want to talk about is the structure of the tests. So Cypress IO, again, it pretty much models itself on JavaScript test frameworks like Jest. So if you're coming from like, again, NUnit, MS tests, some of these things may seem a little bit different, but again, it's pretty straightforward. So first, you wrap your tests inside, they say context, which is fine, but they also allow describe. Either one of them, they're equivalent. But basically what this does is it gives like a name to a group of tests. So when you were looking, say, in the panel with all those tests, and you're seeing those bold tests, that's basically what it was. So it's groups of tests here, and you can have them nested as much as you want, okay? Now, you have setup and teardown, but here they're called before each, after each. And before each will just run a particular bit of setup before every test inside that grouping. Before will run it just once. After each basically are kind of like the equivalent, but after the tests are done, if you want to do some teardown. This is something where like say in NUnit, you would have done with say attributes, but here, that's how you do it, right? And each one of these takes basically a closure, right? A closure and arrow notation. Again, you've done any relatively modern C#, this shouldn't be terribly unfamiliar to you, okay? Now the actual tests themselves will live inside blocks called its. Okay.
So Ahmed, on the before when you say cy.visit, it is like you can just test any site in the world, or
yes.
Okay.
Yes. I can point this at Google and test them. I can point this at prod and test it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, that's a good point you bring that up, because Cypress is an end-to-end testing framework. It basically just steers your page, sends in commands, sees what pops up from the page. So you can point it at absolutely anything, even stuff you don't own the code for. Yeah. Yeah, a good question. And that is actually another nice thing too, because yeah, once you've deployed, you can also like run some tests on a deployed one just to see if there were any like issues with deployment. And that's something I've done in the past too, and actually caught deployment issues with like in the previous role. So yes. And in fact, and so what Assad was referring to here was the CY visit. That's how you go to a page. And there's ways, again, we can actually store our base page in a configuration so we don't have to repeat ourselves. But yeah, that's what it's going. So it's basically saying, hey, before every test, go back to this page, and then it does the test, right? And so it here will do the test. And again, just like the scribe, you have a description, then you have the body of the test, which is basically a closure, okay? And then here you'll see like CY. Now, one thing you noticed in early on, I hope, is that CY is used a lot. In Cypress, one of the most heavily used objects that it exposes is CY, and that has a lot of stuff in there like visit in, get in elements, and so on. And it's mainly chainable. So like in this particular case, what they're doing is they're saying, hey, I want you to get the item, the element that has the class of action email. Now, so what Cypress is going to do is it's going to try to fetch it. But if it can't find it, it's going to pause for a little bit and retry. So it's not going to immediately jump in. So it'll pause for a certain amount of time until it hits the timeout, which you can customize before it takes the next step. So right off the bat, this seems pretty synchronous, and you're thinking, you're writing your test and you're thinking, oh, okay, I'm doing this, then that. Even though it's asynchronous, Cypress actually shields you from that. And then if it can't find it in the end, it will give you an error. So this actually contains some assertions in addition to an accessor and also a waiter. Okay, does that make sense? And that's one of the nice things, is that you really kind of, the whole idea that you're doing asynchronous stuff is largely hidden from you, but you still have to sometimes deal with it. And then it's chaining off of that. In this case, so whenever it finds it, it comes back and it returns the element corresponding to that. And so this guy's just chained off of that and saying, oh, hey, you know, type this guy in here. And then this is just an assertion where it's just confirming that what we just typed is in there, right? I hope that'll be the case. And so on. And these are like special commands to type and so on, okay? And so you can see here that you have a lot of tests here that are basically going through and testing the various elements, right? Add in something, submit something, and so on, right? In this case, you know, you can find also, right? You can select like various, you know, attributes and so on, okay? You also have the ability to go through and actually, you know, check to see if there's a particular, you know, text, you know, like substrings contained inside the elements, and on and on. Okay. So, and again, here it's picking up elements by IDs, right? So, any questions so far? And I'm going to show you more examples, but this is just kind of a quick and dirty idea of how the structure of the test are written. Okay. And so again, so generally what we'll do is we'll do context or describe. I personally prefer describe just because that's in keeping with most of the other JavaScript test frameworks, but again, you don't have to, right? Your string, your closure, before is before each, any number of its, or you could just nest. You can have additional contexts in there and so on. And then, of course, in there, additional tests and so on. We have the blocks, okay? And so that's going to be how you're going to get kind of like your nesting and kind of have tested a suite. And if you're used to writing stuff in, say, Gherkin styles, like the givens, whens, thens, then this kind of gives you also a good way to structure it in terms of that particular test writing style. Okay, so aliasing. Okay, so here, so one important thing, and this is kind of an interesting little gotcha. So whenever you do a CY get on an element, you can't store it in a variable and then reuse it. It doesn't quite work that way. So what Cypress does is it gives you what it calls aliases. So for instance, take this guy right here. So it's picking up an item to the class table, finding the selector with the body and so on, picks up the first element, yada, 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 finally fetches this guy, and then it says as first button. What this does is it actually gives a name to this particular element that it is fetching. And so whenever you want to reuse this particular element, you would then just use this with an @ sign in front of it, kind of like this. Okay? So in this case, they fetch this guy, you've got an alias, and now they're clicking on it. Now they're looking at it, they're checking the class of the element to make sure that, you know, it is the same class corresponding to its success and so on. Okay? And that's the alias. Now, you also can alias like routes, like API routes, right? And in this particular case, right, what they're doing is, you know, again, they're making a call, you know, here CY server says, hey, I'm going to go ahead and about to start, stubbing like some API responses, or I'm going to add in some routing commands. And we'll look at this more when we get to mocks. And then it's like, okay, so for this particular route, okay, anything with, anything starting with comments, after it could be anything, of course, method get. Okay, let's go ahead and call this alias as get comment. Now it's clicking a button, and this button is making that API call. Now, the API call takes time. So it can't just immediately say, oh, hey, okay, we're done, right? Depending on latency, lag on a server, it'll be a few seconds. So now what it does is it can wait on that using the same alias, right? And this is one of those cases where you do have to be aware that now you're writing asynchronous code, right? Because in this case, you click, you're done, you moved on. Well, if you try to immediately start looking for status codes, problem. So now you know, okay, well, I got to wait for this particular guy to resolve, and then I can start chaining stuff off of it. Well, again, we're doing that via the alias. So that particular alias, again, you could use it for elements, or you could use it for API routes. Okay? So any questions?
So the routing, is that's saying that if the web page makes an external call, then that's what you're checking for?
Yes, so exactly.
Okay.
So it's basically saying, because this button that it's clicking, when you click that button, it's actually making a call to get in the comments. And since it already aliased that, it's saying, hey, wait for this API call to resolve, and then, and then check. Yes. And there's ways where you could actually intercept these routes and return whatever data you want to guarantee that, you're actually not, like, if you're dealing with live data and the data could change, you can actually intercept those calls too. And I'll show you how you can do that too. Yes. Let's see.
So I have a question. Usually, whenever we create any kind of we use like a React or something like that, which dynamically creates your buttons and everything. In that case, how do you maybe I'm going ahead, but like, how do you know that this is the button? Like, we don't have the ID or anything, but that seems confusing sometimes, right?
Yes. So when you're dealing with stuff like React, and this is where it could get a little unpleasant unless you code for it. I mean, my recommendation is, if you have any kind of control over the markup, is to ensure that you add in, data test ID inside your markup for your buttons, and then fetch based on that attribute. Because like you say, when React generates these things, it's gonna give it some obfuscated class name, right? Mm-hmm. It's not gonna know what it's called. You could try to fetch by basically the F to it, but that's very brittle. You don't want to do that. And so if you at all could possibly have any control over it, make sure these guys are inserted inside the various elements you may want to test on. And then in Cypress, you could just basically use this to search and pick those guys up. That would be my recommendation. Failing that, there's really no good way. I mean, I think Cypress has a plugin for working with React, but at least out of the box, there's no good way of short of that. And honestly, if I'm dealing with a lot of like React specific code and I'm just interested in testing components, I end up just using Enzyme. But again, at that point in time, I'm really just doing component testing in Jest. That gives me a very reliable way of actually testing my components in isolation. If you want to test your entire application, your entire page, everything, you will code in some testability. But again, if you're fine with just testing particular components in isolation, then you may want to actually think something like Enzyme with Jest. And that solution works for the plugin. That answer your question?
Yeah.
And your question is really good too, because it does bring up an important point that we do need to make sure that our page is coded for testability, right? Even if you locate elements willy-nilly, you got an element selector, that's very brittle, right? The layout could change. Or in React, right? I click on it, and Cypress will happily give me this long obfuscated class name. Well, sure, that'll work, but next time we build, right? And so you really need to kind of think about, okay, let's put in some stuff in the page also to aid our testability. Let's not just, kind of capture whatever, right? And this particular issue that you want to kind of think about, the term is brittleness, right? Whenever you locate elements in a way that they're very, very susceptible to changes that will break your tests, even though these changes are not like errors in application under test, then that's what we call brittleness. And we do try to avoid brittle tests by doing things like data test IDs wherever possible. Okay. Yeah, no, good question, and definitely one of the other kind of things to really keep in mind if you do an end-to-end testing. Absolutely. So again, so over here, Cypress is just showing you the different kinds of assertions, right? And again, just remember your CYs also have implicit assertions. So you're getting quite a bit here. So you're making a call for something, it's looking for it, it's asserting on its existence, there's some polling, you're doing a find on what's found, again, you're chaining off a should, which checks for a class, and so on. But like a lot of these things actually have assertions. So you can actually have something that just seems to navigate, doesn't seem to assert, but in reality, underneath the hood, it's doing a lot of assertions, right? So even like a pure kind of navigation, apparent navigation test, because Cypress is doing these assertions and these weights and these polls, there's actually a fair amount of like testing going on, even in apparently testless chunks of code like this and this. Okay. And again, and they're showing you just, again, they also support other types of assertions, right? They support, expect, right? Which is kind of, again, familiar if you're coming from, say, what are these? Are these like the chai style assertions, right? So they'll support that. If you do a should, you could go ahead and put a callback there to have like a more sophisticated check. So you're saying, oh, hey, by the way, I also want to go ahead and test on a result that's pulled from here. So here's my callback and here's what I want here, right? One quick gotcha to keep in mind, if you try to use a CY inside here, bad things happen. So just keep that in mind. Cypress isn't very good about having, like, say, a CY, like any of these CY commands occurring inside like a body of a closure in the should. Right? And again, you can see here, same sort of thing, right? And of course, they're coming off of here and then. One other thing too, so this then also reminds me of a little something to keep in mind. So, and again, this is probably a little bit more relevant for folks who are kind of a little more comfortable with JavaScript. But even though Cypress is returning what looks like a promise like this, right? It's kind of a Cypress style promise, so you can't really call a wait on them. And that's one of the big kind of, sort of weaknesses. But again, if you're not really too familiar or comfortable with JavaScript, that may not bother you too much. But a wait is a way of kind of waiting on synchronous code that gives you a very kind of flatter structure. So don't let this fool you. That's not a pure and actual, like, honest to goodness JavaScript awaitable promise. That's more of a sort of Cypress promise-ish object that's not awaitable. Okay? And so on. Okay.
Quick question.
Yes.
So I saw as you were going through, like there's some pop-ups and hovers like help that came up. Is there something special you had to do to get that in VS Code, or is that if you have the Cypress project, everything just kind of finds itself?
No, this is actually something special. If I recall correctly, I might have installed some TypeScript support. So this might actually be type inferencing. Because if you look at here, like I'm going to hover over this. So if you can see here, this looks very much like TypeScript, right?
Right.
Value, any, and so on. But that wasn't out of Cypress. No, this was stuff actually I had installed on my own.
Right. But I mean, on the Cypress stuff, like the sci.get, I think had more. It looked like when you were going through it, it had a lot more
like
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And in this case, so in this case, I mean, if you install like the TypeScript support in VS Code, then you should be getting this, because even though it's JavaScript, it will do a fair amount of type inferencing for you. And so this is pretty much kind of that kicking in. And I think Cypress is a little bit aware, because they have added in like some extra, like you can see here, right? At HTVS Cypress, whatever. So Cypress is clearly leveraging some of that.
Are there other extensions that you install that you recommend people to add to VS Code to help them do Cypress more effectively?
Not really. As long as, I mean, your VS Code should automatically be JavaScript aware. Since it's a Microsoft product, the TypeScript might be baked in anyway, because that is a type. But if not, kind of put that in there. Outside of that, not really. I mean, you could put in like ESLint. I'm not sure how much benefit you're gonna. I mean, ESLint is useful. Don't get me wrong, but in something like Cypress and test, I'm not sure like how useful something like ESLint is. So as long as you just basically JavaScript mode and then like the TypeScript are pretty beneficial. Maybe linting is your preference. Make sure, of course, it can handle formatting, right? That it's automatic. Not only will it format like JavaScript, which it should, but also I recommend making sure you have like a JSON formatter installed, because if you start mocking out, like say API calls, you may be putting in some pretty big JSON payloads and responses in separate files. And so having a decent JSON formatter, and you can easily install one from within the tools, it's going to make your life a lot easier, because nothing's worse than trying to, play around with a, 3,000 line JSON. It's all basically. So that I would recommend when you start getting into mocking and fixtures. That's going to be very, very helpful. In fact, I would probably jump on that before the others, especially since the others are probably already in there by virtue, again, it's being Microsoft product. Let's see. So I see here we got about roughly 20 minutes. So let's look at some of the network requests. Okay. So one of the things, again, that Cypress does do, and again, out of the box, is it does let you do a fair amount of mocking and stubbing your API. And so and let's go to a specific example that I'm most interested in showing you. It's simple, but it's illustrative. Right. So in this case, let's see what I get. This is the guy I'm looking for. Yep, status and so on. Yeah. So over here, let's see. Yes. Okay. So over here. So again, here, what they're doing. So first you make a call to cy.server, which you've seen above. So then you can go ahead and put in a route. So what they're doing here is they're saying, hey, they want to test how the page behaves with a particular, with putting comments, but maybe they're not terribly interested in the backend. Maybe they assume it's fine. Maybe it's still under development. Maybe they're just really interested at the page itself, given a backend that functions like it should, operates properly. So in this case, basically, so what they're doing here is they're saying, okay, well, you know what? Okay, here's the route. Again, my method's put. Here's the URL, add in a little wildcard, so whatever they add in after is fine, so on. And you're saying, here's a response, okay? So send out this response, okay? So now, whenever the page makes a call to that API, and again, it's all run within Cypress. So Cypress is going to intercept that call and return this guy right here, which gives you the benefit that you can know for sure what data is coming back from an API call because you've pretty much sort of set it yourself, which means you can continue testing the rest of the page. Useful in scenarios where, your API call could basically, keep changing because, it's based on a database, whatever, so keep, returning different results, right? Also could be useful in scenarios where, again, it's not ready yet, site's down, maybe even performance is an issue. Now, and then what they're doing is they're saying, oh, hey, again, let's click on this guy, right, which is our network element. Could be a button, could be whatever. It's making an API call. And again, now we're waiting to make sure this resolves. And now we're saying, okay, now let's make sure that this guy comes back with a message, right? Now, in this particular case, what I would do, and the way to kind of have this done is to illustrate that. But what I would do is I would actually check the page rather than a network call for the results. I would check whatever div is supposed to show the output and say, oh, hey, this div now should have this message. So they're doing it a little bit differently, but that's because they're trying to demonstrate how you can chain off a network calls and expect on them. But normally if you're doing something like that, you would say, okay, cool, now check the output, div, and make sure that, this guy comes back in here. And I know it should because I intercepted a call. Now, when you're doing this, you have a lot of benefits, but again, you're not testing the full breadth of your application. Technically, you're no longer end-to-end testing, right? You're really doing more front-end testing at this point, which, I mean, it's fine. If that's what you want, that's fine, but just kind of be aware that, you could be getting a lot more benefit out of your tests, right? So there's just something to keep in mind when you're kind of deciding on whether or not you want to mock something, okay? And I would definitely say, think about your tests carefully and kind of think about maybe some test invariants. That way you can always test on live data, but if not, you do have your mocks if you're, if you kind of get back to the wall. Okay? So, and remember, all these examples are there in Cypress. So when you install it, which should be a smoother process, I hope, we hope, right? Then you should be able, then you will have access to all these examples. You could run them, you can play with them. And these examples are a really great way to learn. I mean, just using these examples and nothing else you'll get good and functional with Cypress fast. So again, here they're kind of showing you like the different ways you can get stuff. Hey, they do also support, like the jQuery style selectors for, those of you who are nostalgic, right? And you can see here, and Assad had kind of asked about this, right? Notice how they're picking up something by the data test ID, right? We talked a little bit about that, right? We're trying to have those attributes in there. And so this is how you can kind of pick up, say, an item by attribute, right? And again, you can invoke particular commands on the items that do come back, and that kind of invokes like jQuery commands on them. So you can actually do a fair amount of stuff. Now, whether or not I necessarily recommend this, that's another matter, but they're showing you that you can do it, right? They're kind of showing you, hey, there's all the stuff you could do. And again, contains will pretty much find, the element that has that particular string. And again, could have extra stuff in there, but at least that has to be there as a substring. Supports regular expressions. So if you're trying to do like an exact match, you could actually kind of use a regular expression and force it to do an exact match, because otherwise contains just checks a substring. Okay. And so on and so forth. Okay. So to show you just the different ways you could basically access and dig through elements. And again, my recommendation is always try not to do stuff that's really kind of structure dependent on your page, because that does make your page more brittle. But this does at least show you how you can do it, and the different ways you can pick items, again, by all the different selectors. Okay? So even if you're stuck and you really can't just use data test ID because they did whatever, you do have ways around it, but you will probably have more brittle test as a result. Right? And again, and that's something you never really had to deal with in unit tests. That is a consideration for these types of tests. Good so far? So let's see. Okay. Now, another nice thing, so Cypress does let you change your viewport size on your browser, right? Which is useful because then you can kind of test your page's responsiveness, right? And so, again, here, for instance, they're showing how they're making these changes. And I think they have some aliases for different, like different device names here. So, so if you wanted to do like various, accessibility tests on, on mobile and tablet and so on, you could basically do viewport changes and then basically just test on the various elements. So you can get a fair amount of, at least within a scope of, what the responsive will give you, kind of cross-platform, an idea of how, it'll look on different devices. And I've used this too, especially to do, again, kind of do mobile testing where, again, responsive pages, we know the flow has to be different, elements have to vanish and so on. Switch the viewport, do the tests, boom. And again, they even support switching over to portrait landscape. So that's pretty useful here. Okay. Weights. Now notice the first thing they say here, be careful of adding unnecessary wait times. So they show you how to do different types of weights, again, so but it's definitely not advisable unless you have a very, very good reason. Whenever you want to wait on something, try to wait on an element having a particular content or on, say, a network call coming back. Try not to use waits on times, okay? And the reason why you don't want to use waits on times is, one, maybe your API, if you're making an API call, is going to take a little bit longer this time. Boom, your test just failed. Or if you want to play it safe and have a nice long wait, well, okay, your API is probably coming in faster most of the time. Now your test is running slow, right? I mean, a second here, a second there, 5 seconds here. Pretty soon you're eating up a few minutes just in waits. And these tests, which again tend to be slower than unit tests, can get to be slow enough to the point that there could be a very, very big issue in even trying to run them and getting any benefit out of them. So very important on these wait times, right? So again, I show you how you could do them, but you generally want to try to wait instead for like server calls or elements, having particular values or something. And end-to-end testing lingo, these are sometimes called synchronization points. And that's kind of like what you want to do is like wait on the existence or a particular value at a synchronization point. Try not to do a timed wait, okay? But the only time where you might be able to get away with it is if, again, like the viewport example, you're switching your viewport, it takes maybe a quarter of a second for the switch to take effect. Okay, fine, maybe. And even then, think, is there a better way? But that's like maybe the borderline where you can accept that. And Cypress kind of did that with their examples here, where they kind of waited for 200 milliseconds just because they wanted to make sure the viewport was fully done and the page re-rendered. but there wasn't like a network call. It's not necessarily subject to latency or anything like that. So that'll be like a consistent time. And that's one case where it'll be safer to use a wait. Does that make sense? Yeah, and in fact, here they say, we added a COI wait, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in this case, it was actually done just for our benefit. So we shouldn't even have to do that in a viewport, okay? But if it is a case where it's maybe something with rendering and you know for a fact it's rendering only, there's no synchronization point, there's no variation in there, i.e. no API calls being made, it's very short, maybe. But again, if you have a better way of doing it, just think through your alternatives first. Okay. So let's see. So we got about 10 minutes. So okay, we're doing pretty okay on time. So again, so Cypress does include various other, various utilities just to kind of make your life a little bit easier, right? So it automatically incorporates Lodash, right? Which again, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Lodash, but it brings a lot of really useful kind of querying, functional programming-ish facilities to JavaScript. It gives JavaScript a lot of stuff that's kind of similar to like what you get with LINQ. So it's actually a very useful tool. And so Cypress does include that. And when Cypress does include these external like libraries, you then access them with like Cypress dots and then a prefix. In this case, Lodash is prefixed with an underscore. And then after that, whatever comes here is just like the methods or functions, probably functions because it's just a namespace under the Lodash namespace. Here, again, that's jQuery, right? The $sign. So again, it's all tucked in under the Cypress object, right? And then they include things like moments, okay, which is very useful for time. And in fact, the Cypress moment allows you to also like change your time on your page. So yeah, so if you're trying to do like there was one time where I had to like run a test for again a previous role. I had to like, we had a particular piece of functionality that was only supposed to activate at a particular time of year. And I was like running all this in Cypress. I'm like, oh, so I just pretty much just went in here and like in moment, like, oh, hey, set the clock of this page to be, the time was supposed to happen. Boom. And so that could be useful for, making sure that, oh, hey, our holiday specials, on this e-commerce page I'm doing are in fact showing up if in fact it were, Christmas or week from Christmas or whatever. So that makes it, so that's pretty useful. And again, here it is, like Cypress moment, right? It has the various time facilities, the ability to set your time and so on, and that really can make your life a lot easier if you need to test these kinds of time-sensitive things. Okay?
Will it let you do time zones as well? Like change your time zone or change your locale?
I believe so. The only time I've used it was to actually just change like the date to make it think it was like around Christmas time. But I believe you can do that. Don't quote me on that, but I think so. Yeah, I know what I use. Yeah, I know what I did use, and it seems like it should be the case. So yeah. So I do believe so. Yeah, and for these guys like moments, the best way to find a documentation, just go look for moments documentation because that's an external library that basically Cypress is just providing for your convenience. It's not a Cypress thing. Cypress is just giving you moment and Lodash where you can find the documentation separately on those. Okay, so let's see. And then here, again, you could even do checks on like your browser window, confirm things like, right, hey, what's our encoding, all that good stuff. Okay, so these are the examples. Now, so the other thing to kind of look at, so in Cypress, again, you can mock responses. And even though you can mock responses like we saw, you can also, when your responses get big, you really don't want to kind of include them in your test, right? Nothing ruins a test like a 5,000 line JSON, inside a function parameter, okay? I mean, so what you could do is Cypress has a fixtures folder where you could go ahead and put in like your JSON responses, and then you could just load them externally, okay? And so I believe the network request should have a fixture example. And so if you want to start dealing with, we actually have it here. We have it somewhere here. Maybe somewhere here. We have actually, we do have it. There we go. So let's see, file spec. Okay, let's take a look here. Okay, so yeah, so for example, like here, okay? So in this case, what they're doing is they're calling CY fixture, which basically loads data from the fixture folder and giving it an alias. And now it's here, and now you can basically just use it in mocks and so on. And now at least if you have a really nice big response. Again, you have it tucked away in another file where it's not really messing up, the flow of your tests. Okay, and Cypress again has the fixtures folder for that purpose. Okay, now again, the integration folder is where it expects you to put in your tests, and Cypress calls these tests integration tests. I don't agree with their terminology, but no one consulted me, so I call them end-to-end. Cypress calls them integration, so just kind of keep that in mind. So over here again, here's where you put in your plugins. Here you have various supports where you can actually add in some like startup code that should start up before all the tests, where you can even extend the CY objects, right? So you can actually add in some extra support here. Also, if I wanted, put in like maybe libraries, whatever, and you don't want to be picked up as say tests because it's like a JS, you can tuck them under here where they'll be safe from Cypress prying eyes, right? This guy, Cypress JSON, that's basically its configuration file. And as you can see here, it's empty. But here you could do things like set up your base URL, right? So like when you do like your CY visit, you don't have to give it the full URL. You can always give it a relative URL, and you could say, hey, this is the base URL. So if you do switch, say, from prod to whatever, you just change it in one spot, and then all your tests are pointing to wherever they need to be relative to. You can also set your like default timeout, command timeout, API timeout. So if you find, for example, that I think the default is like 4 seconds. 4 seconds is just not quite long enough, maybe because, again, you're dealing with lagged server, whatever. You can go ahead and set your default timeouts higher in here. So this is where you set your configurations. Okay. Let's see. So any questions? Okay. And let's see. So this is, mainly, okay, you got about 5 minutes. So this, again, this was just a brief kind of overview of just Cypress IO. And again, so the main things, again, the kind of takeaway points are: 1, simplicity. Okay, it's very simple. Startup time, notwithstanding, it actually is faster than Selenium. I know the little installation didn't do me any favors, but but also, and it's a full-fledged framework out of the box, which kind of contributes to the simplicity. But as a result of that, again, you do make some trade-offs, right? You make some trade-offs in terms of customizability, some trade-offs in terms of, say, some of the more powerful advanced features that maybe some of the other tools might give you. But if you're looking to do some end-to-end testing and you're really looking for a tool you could start off with very quickly, and I would definitely say this is a good tool to look at. So any questions we have? We got 4 whole minutes.
What would you say is the thing that's going to trip, like people starting out with Cypress, what's going to really trip them up that they need to be careful of?
What's going to really trip them up, I think, is going to be the few times where you have to realize you're dealing with an asynchronous page. Like the time when you click on a button and you forget that this button is making an API call. So even though it returns immediately, that API call is still processing. That's the part I think that's going to trip up most people. And so, yeah, and that's where the synchronization points come in. Because since Cypress shields you from this a lot of the times, it's easy to forget it's there until you stumble into it. And I think that's going to be the thing that's going to trip most people out in dealing with any end-to-end tested framework. The fact that your call came back, but a lot of these calls are like async calls that come back immediately, even though they're not quite done yet, and you have to do some kind of wait to know you're done. That I think is going to be probably the biggest in Cypress and in other end-to-end testing frameworks.
We have a question on the chat. If I have to log into my website to get to a page, is there a way to do this other than log in, go to the page on a before each, followed by logging out on an after each?
So what you could do, you could do a login on a before. That way your login stays throughout all of your tests, because if you do a login on before each, then before every test you're logging in and then you're logging out, and that's going to eat up some time, right? I mean, again, it's gonna be where you're really gonna feel it in your test. So in something like a test, I would probably recommend something like doing it on a before, logging out on an after, unless you absolutely need the logout to reset some kind of state and you don't have a better way of doing it. And that's gonna save you a lot of time, because then all of your tests will be running in that logged in page. You might also be able to do something in the index file to kind of have an auto login at the beginning. But the only thing I've ever used this index file for was like whitelisting certain cookies and so on. So you might also have a solution here that'll actually like basically kind of go across all pages. But if you're gonna do something like that, do a before and after, not a before each. Remember, before each is gonna be before every test in that group. And so if it's something that's gonna be potentially time consuming, and 1 or 2 seconds is time consuming with a before each, then definitely think of keeping it on a before and on an after, not a before each. But again, you might be able to do something with index.js to kind of share it among all the files, or maybe even at least have some code that you could just kind of call and abstracts away the login process, so you at least don't have to repeat yourself outside of just saying, hey, log in, the details are tucked away elsewhere, so I don't have to repeat myself. Does that answer the question? Yeah, I just wasn't sure if I quite got the answer, but.
Sounds right.
Okay, cool. I'll take silence as assent. That works for me.
Okay. Do you have any advice for people on how to organize your tests and category? Like, what's worked for you in organizing your testing to make it, I guess, clearer that what you're verifying and how it's working?
Sure. So there's a few principles I use when organizing my tests. So first, I like to try to have a page object. Now, I'm using the term page object very loosely. It's basically any kind of page abstraction mechanism. So I'll have something, again, it could be an object, right? It could be a class, that's fine. Where where all of my navigation is basically factored into that. So instead of like say, clicking, like if I want to like say submit a carting order on a page, instead of like saying, oh, hey, check agreed to terms, click on cart, instead I'll have like a page object method that basically just says add to cart, and it does all of that. That's going to make my test a lot more readable, right? Because you're going to go through your test and be like, oh, hey, page add to cart, page check status, right? It tucks away all those like kind of selectors or however you're picking your things. And it also makes it a lot better because if your page does play because it's brittle, you only have to fix it in one place. So that's the first thing. Use a page object. And you can find details on a page object pattern all over. But that's like number one. Definitely use a page object. Number two, I do like to have my tests kind of broken up in different ways. If I'm working on a feature, I try to have like my tests basically set up to where each test ties to a feature, like acceptance criteria, right? And that's what I'm first working on, because I want to have some granularity so that if something fails, I'm more likely to find out kind of where it is, right? Now, once I get to the point where everything's fine, everything's good, and these features should be solid, and anything that happens with them would be regression, then I might actually have coarser grain tests that do a lot more like workflow tests. And the reason why I consider switching between the two, so the acceptance ones gives you more traceability, right? Good for that. But when you have the thicker tests, they tend to run faster because you take advantage of a lot of the setup and teardown, if you have any teardown, by doing a lot more testing in between those spaces. So that's going to give you like more speed. So I would say start off with like say acceptance, and then acceptance-based test tied to your feature. And then as you kind of, as everything's kind of solidified and you're like, these are good, see about making them into like say workflow tests that kind of mimic a path a user would use to get to outcomes that hit on the different features you want. Okay? That makes sense? And then like the describe blocks, for instance, they'll pretty much like sort of, tell you at least what group of tests you're dealing with. And, don't be afraid to nest those blocks too, because they could definitely make your life easier as far as testing and reviewing tests. So that'll be good performance wise. And it'll be good when you're looking at these things now in terms of, now we just need them for regression. So make sure nothing we did broke our page. Right? Cool. And that's how it organized. That's kind of like the threefold sort of organization I would do. Page object, tied to acceptance criteria in initial stages, move them over to workflow for more efficiency, and doing like more work with the test because I'm not worried about granularity and isolating failures at that point because everything should work. Listening to know if it broke.
Nice. All right. Any other last questions for Ahmed? You nailed it.
Okay.
You got it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. Again, apologies for the rough start. So again, a little mental note to do my dry runs on a computer I'm going to present on. But I enjoyed it, and I again, if you have any questions, definitely. I believe Garo has my contact info. Feel free. I'm more happy to answer any of your questions.
Do you prefer anything over email, or because I could post your contact info on the messages if you want that?
Email's good because that way it gives me a little bit more time to sort of kind of reflect and maybe, paste some snippets of code, whatever, because I'm kind of assuming, these are dev questions. I'll probably want to, maybe, hey, here's a chunk of code. So email's the best form for me. Yes.
Cool.
And it gives me more flexibility responding.
Well, thank you very much, Ahmed, for it was a bit short notice too. I guess saw the invite went out late, but we really appreciate you coming out talking to us about Cypress.io. It sounds like an exciting way to do end-to-end testing and to find a way to get people into the testing idea.
Yes.
I think that usually is the biggest challenge. So that's been interesting to see. So, and I'll post your contact info. The recording should be available in a day or two, depending on how quick WebEx does it. And I'll post a link in the meetup for the YouTube, and I'll try to post it on the social media too. That way you'll kind of get the that way as well. It makes it easier.
Awesome.
But yeah, thank you all very much, and have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.